All right, I'm going to get started here. So everybody's seen my screen? Yes? Okay, good, good. So we want
Yes.
to welcome everyone again that's here for our 15th episode in season 6. This is again Environmental Fridays. It is personal. If you want to learn some more, you can check out this link that takes you to our website, or you can use the QR code to get there. This month, we have already gone through 2 presentations, very good presentations, one from Louisiana State University. Um, then Lena from Trinidad talked about pollinators. Today we will be hearing from Andrew Revkin about communicating climate change and sustainability. Next week, the EPA Region 5 Asthma Program Coordinator, Monica, will help us kick off the National Asthma and Allergy Month, which is next month. And then our very last presentation in season 6 is going to be done by Motria. And we experienced a lot of the smoke from the wildfires here in the Midwest and maybe other parts of the country too. And so, of course, as a chemist, I would like to know what is in that smoke. And hopefully some of you would like to know that too. So we will end with chemical composition of the Canadian wildfires, and that would bring season 6 to a close. This morning, we have the honor of having as our co-host Ariel Young. Ariel, can you show us,
Hi.
can you show us your video? Because, yeah,
Yeah, sure, no problem.
okay. So I know that from conversation with you, that you're also looking forward to the end of this semester.
Yeah, I am.
Yes. So could you tell us, because you mentioned to me that you might be very interested in doing volunteer work, paid positions as well, I assume.
Yeah, I
Tell us
am trying
something
to
about
get
what,
volunteering.
yes, so could
Sorry.
you tell us some more about that, like what you might be interested in?
Okay, so last year I was an environmental consultant for a STEM project by ExxonMobil on robotics. So I've been trying to dip my foot into climate change activism a little bit more. So I definitely want to broaden my horizons with either more volunteer work or an internship this summer. So that's what I have my eyes on. That's my target.
Very good. Well, maybe your wish would be taken up by somebody. Yeah.
Hopefully.
You never know. You
I
never.
do have research time, so I can put my best foot forward.
So you would be available like from middle of May. What's your time frame here?
Yeah, the middle of May sounds good right now.
All the way to
Until about August.
okay. That's a substantial amount of time.
Yeah.
So we'll try to help you secure
Thank you so
something.
much.
Yes. All
Thank
right.
you.
So you will be hearing more from Ariel when she introduces our main speaker today. Thank you for accepting our invite to co-host.
No problem. The pleasure's mine.
All right. So we will hear next from Shamira Levine Davy. She is going to do our special feature. Before she does, just a quick introduction. She's a native of St. James in Louisiana, a third generation human rights activist, And in her role today, she's the executive assistant of Rise St. James, which is a faith-based grassroots nonprofit organization that is fighting for eradication of petrochemical emissions in Cancer Alley. She is the daughter of Sharon Levine, who started this organization. And Sharon Levine actually was our very, very first guest speaker for Environmental Fridays. So it's good to keep up that connection with Rice and James and with the Levines. So, Shamira, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Desmond. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shamar Levine Davy. Thank you all for having me and for tuning in today. So I have about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to use this time to give you all a little history of Rise St. James and St. James Parish. And then I will have a call to action at the end to see if you all could take some steps right now that can help our movement. So what is St. James Parish? What is Cancer Alley? Cancer Alley is an 85-mile stretch of road that stretches from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, Louisiana, along the Mississippi River corridor. And in that 85-mile stretch, there's over 150 industries. Most recently, I've seen the numbers up to about 180 industries in this 85-mile stretch. So if you do the math, you can see that there are more industries than there is miles in this area. And with this concentrated area of industries, there have been links to cancer, asthma, low birth weights, premature births, miscarriages, rashes, illnesses. Just to live in this area, you are 300 times more likely to be diagnosed with some type of illness. And this area, mostly where the industries are located in Cancer Alley, is next to the African American communities. It's very strategic. So growing up here, I grew up in the 5th district of St. James Parish. And St. James Parish is one of the parishes along the Mississippi River corridor. Now in Louisiana, we say parishes, but most everyone else, every other state in the US says county. So a parish is our version of a county. So in St. James Parish, the demographics is broken down possibly around, well, approximately about 49% Caucasian and about 49% African American. But the industries are only located in the African American districts. It's very strategic. So specifically the 5th district where I grew up, where my mom still lives to this day, is a 10-mile radius that homes 12 different industries. And to say that the 5th district has so many industries in it, it is often the most poor district in St. James Parish. So let me tell you about how Rise St. James got started. And Desmond gave you a little history, a little synopsis of Rise. Rise is a nonprofit organization, grassroots for the fence line community, and it was created in the 5th district at St. James by my mom. So in 2016, my mom was a full-time educator at the St. James High School, which she taught there for 39 years. She was going to a local meeting of people in the community that were concerned about the environment. Just so happens the lady who was leading that meeting was actually an active industry worker. And so when my mom would go to the meetings, there wasn't a lot of action that was being done. And it created a frustration for her because she felt as if the people that were in that meeting were already feeling defeated, felt that there was nothing that could be done about the industries. And technically, some of them were working in the industries at that time. So, they weren't necessarily trying to stop them. And people believe that nothing can stop these industries. That is just a fact of life. So in 2018, my mama continued going to those meetings. And then in 2018, she heard about this $9.4 billion industry named Formosa Plastics that was going to be built 2 miles from her house in the 5th district, where the industries were already overpopulated. And the way she found this out was the governor at the time, Governor John Bell Edwards, was announcing it on the news, excitedly telling the community how amazing, how this state-of-the-art industry is going to be built here. And people were applauding. And my mom felt very triggered by that. And she was like, excuse me? And often this is typically how the industries work. When the industries want to be built into our community, they go speak to the local politicians. They do not come and speak to the community. They don't engage our interests. They don't try to buy us out. They just come in and get built. And on top of that, they get a huge tax breaks. But if you and I were going to go buy some property, we would have to pay taxes. These industries come in and they get tax breaks. They promise jobs and they don't always give those jobs. They don't abide by their promises. Anyways, my mom decided, something needs to be done. So she gathered some of her friends and neighbors in her den at home. She made a good old pot of gumbo. We're in Louisiana. She made some gumbo. And they sat around, her and about 10 others, and they just said, like, what are we going to do? And they decided that, hey, we're going to fight back. We don't know how to do it. We're going to fight back. And so that is how Rise became Rise in that moment and on that day. So fast forward, as my mom started that, I was working in Baton Rouge. I would go and check in every now and then when I could make it to a rally or event. But in 2020, after COVID happened, everything kind of stopped. My mom offered, like, can you come down and help me? And I was a little resistant, but I was like, okay. So I came in to help her because at a time that I thought my mom should be retiring. My mom was embarking on a brand new journey, on a brand new purpose. And she was fighting an uphill battle. People have called this fight a David versus Goliath fight. And if you're not familiar with that story, it's about overcoming the odds and winning against someone that everyone else thinks cannot be defeated. So that is what we mean by that, if you're not familiar with the David and Goliath story. But at the end of the David and Goliath story, David wins. So just, to spoil that for you, David wins and he was the underdog.
Yeah.
And these industries have been described as the Goliath in our fight. So when I came in 2020 to help my mom, it was only just to help her. And after I got in, I began to grow a passion towards this as I began to educate myself more and more. Whenever I was able to recognize the intentionality behind the placement of these industries, when I began to connect the cancers to it, even though growing up, we knew we couldn't drink the water. Growing up, we knew our neighbors were dying of cancer. We heard the term Cancer Alley before, but it's a different feeling whenever you're an adult and you're seeing the data, the research, you're learning about people all over the world that's fighting this. And that is what kept me coming back to this fight over and over and to help my mom. So in 2021, I came in 2020, it was just mom and I. She was the first employee, I was the second employee. And in 2021, if you are not familiar, my mom won the 2021 Goldman Environmental Prize.
Mhm.
And my God, I came in to help my mom because she was stressed. And then I came in and now I was stressed. Okay. It was everything went bananas when she won the Goldman. The phone was ringing, the emails, it was off the chain. But today, here in 2024, I'm very proud to say we have about 8 employees. We have a huge network of support. We have a huge online and digital members, as well as community support. And we have a lot of members that are part of RISE that are former industry workers or cancer survivors. They come after they retire and they fight back against the industries. And so our mission with this is to, number one, to stop industries from being built in our community, to educate our community first and foremost, because I grew up in between these industries and I wasn't fully aware of everything. I grew up smelling the smells and noticing the dust and watching the people around me die of cancer frequently. And it was almost like a normalcy, but it's really not normal. That had become our normal. So I'll reserve some time if we have some time that's meant to answer some questions. But I'll share with you a couple strategies that we use to fight back. We have something called the Chemical of the Month, which we place in newspapers and we do radio ads, and that is highlighting one chemical that gets emitted by these industries. And it's just a paragraph explaining to the community what these chemicals are. We have Rise University, which we just started a new session this week, and we run a session quarterly, and it's an online course for an hour. It's totally free to the community and anybody that wants to join. And each session lasts about 5 weeks, anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, for 1 hour a week on Tuesdays. You can tune in and you can learn about what that course is about. This session that started this week is on plastics and plastic pollution. So if you're interested, I can send that link over for you to register for it. It's totally free. We also do we do press releases, op-eds, we do different communications, and we host meetings, community meetings every month to try to educate. And as of now, we are so, well, let me give you the update on Formosa Plastics as well while I'm giving you the education. I don't want to miss this opportunity and let you guys know. So since 2018, Formosa Plastics has not been built in St. James Parish. Is not built, is no buildings coming up or anything right now. So we see that as a huge victory. And last week we had a monumental moment with the Environmental Protection Agency here in the US, in case you're not in the US. They sent down something called the HON rules, HON, HON. And these HON rules have now created a new standard that industries have to abide by that lowers the emissions of huge toxic carcinogens like ethylene oxide, butadiene, chloroprene. So this new rule that was signed last week is going to require industries that's already here to comply with these standards for 90 days for chloroprene. And then for ethylene oxide, the industries here have a 2-year period that they have to comply with these new standards. Like, we raised our standards, y'all. That's how I like to say it. We raised our standards. EPA raised our standards. And so why this is monumental is because Formosa Plastics cannot abide by those standards. They are way too toxic and they can't produce their chemicals and still meet those requirements. So this is a huge victory for us. We are so excited about this. I'm so happy that my mom was able to see this while she's here and see this victory happening for us. This has changed our community forever.
I emailed you about George a while back. I said,
Yes. Go ahead, Myra.
Yeah, so how am I looking on time?
So if you could do maybe another 3 minutes, we should be okay.
Okay.
And then
Awesome.
we could also have questions, because I know already a lot of people want to get those links. you
Yes, for
talked
sure.
about and get involved in the Rise University. And I for sure want to be involved with the chemical of the month. You know, I'm a chemist.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So once I'm done, I will drop those links in the chat, or I can send those over to you via email.
All right. Okay.
And anyone on this call, you can also go to risestjames.org. That's RISESTJAMES.org. Yes, thank you, Andy. On that website, you will find a link to the Chemical of the Month and all of the other resources that I've spoken about. Also, you will find 2 petitions that we have, which is the call to action that I was gonna bring up in this call. Our first petition is to Citi Bank, Citi Group, they are one of the biggest fossil fuel funders. And we have a petition asking for them to divest and defund from fossil fuel projects. Oftentimes, the banks will give billions of dollars to toxic industries and then create a branch in their government for social and economic and environmental justice, and then give out some money to plant some trees. That's not okay. That's not what we're asking you to do. If you really want to help us, stop funding the projects that are creating this pollution in our community, not give some money to plant some trees in that same community next to the toxic industries. So the petition is asking for them to eliminate and divest from these fossil fuel industries. So you will find that on our website as well. And another one, we had a petition to President Biden asking him to stop promoting plastics, but we're in that place right now where we think we're gonna be just fine with the new Hans rules, but you can still sign it. It's still active at this moment to sign that.
Okay.
And also in my email, if you want to get in touch with me, I'll drop that in the chat as well. But you will find all of these links on our risestjames.org website.
Nice. So does anyone have questions, comments? We could take maybe 2 or 3.
Yes, and thank you. I have some friends. One passed away about 5, 6 years ago. Walkers. Audrey Walker was working with a church down there in New Parish when we came through there after Katrina had happened. It was a church organization, Audrey Walker. I'm not sure if that name sounds familiar to you or not, but I want to thank you for all this information. And I just want to make mention that there's if you've heard of the National Breathe Act, we're trying to gain capacity on that with a lot of these issues. We have a local one, state Breathe Act, and you can just Google it. One of the congresswomen are spearheading the national one, but we're working on one here statewide. One Love Global organization is spearheading that. But please, if you all can attach yourselves to the National Breathe Act, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
All right, very good.
And what are we going to do, Dr. Murray, with our governor signing this this thing to open up this power plant, Palisades again, and then turn around and sign? I mean, after signing a bill for climate change, I mean, that make sense to me because I'm not understanding.
Okay, well, we'll have to look into that and research it, find out what's going on there. All right, thank you. Anybody else has questions or comments based on what you just heard? I've been getting lots of texts from friends here that listen to you, and we definitely want to get press releases from you. We want to learn more about the Rise University. We want to sign the petitions. So offline, I will be reconnecting and connecting with you, Shamira, and your mom, so that we could continue collaborating and supporting what you guys are doing. Thank you so very much for being on. This was really informative. And we are glad for the victories. We are definitely glad for the victories.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
All right. Be good. Okay, so next, Ariel, you are next up to introduce our speaker for today.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Just hold a second for me, please.
Okay. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm looking for the bio. Just give me a second.
Did you find it?
No, is it possible if you can put it up for me? Like share screen?
Yeah, hold on 1 minute here. I will have to copy and paste it in. And I will paste it in here. Okay. You see it?
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and please allow me to introduce Mr. Andrew C. Kevin. Mr. Kevin has spent over 40 years reporting on environmental challenges and choices, mostly for the New York Times. He has covered global warming since 1988, filing award-winning stories from the North Pole, Amazon rainforest, the White House, and beyond. He's helped build programs and courses fostering communication impact at the Academy, Academy of Sciences, Columbia and Pace University, and the National Geographic Society. Revkin runs a webcast, Sustain What, that has reached 3 million viewers. Please join me in subscribing to his related newsletter at revkin.substack.com. He's written 5 books, including The Burning Season, a prize-winning biography of slain rainforest defender Chicos Mendez, that was the basis for a 1994 HBO film of the same name. In Sparing Moments, he is a performing songwriter. He lives on the Maine coast with his wife and sometime co-author Lisa McKaylee. So thank you so much, and please let's honor Mr. Revkin.
Thanks, Ariel, and thank you, Desmond. And that was great to connect with Rise St. James through Shamira. And her mom just yesterday got the Time magazine. She's one of the 100 most influential people on the planet.
That's right.
And they're doing great. They're doing great work down there. And I've started to tweet about it here, even during the show, because believe it or not, Twitter still matters.
That's true.
You just have to dive beneath the pollution on the surface. It's
Yes.
kind of it's a
Yeah.
polluted environment, just like the real environment. So I'm here, I'd love to talk about sustainability and communication. As you heard, I've been a journalist for 40 years, really, and I grew up in printed media like this. This is my first global warming article, 1988.
Wow.
The greenhouse effect. This summer was merely a warm-up. So we
Hmm.
had a hot summer in 1988. The Yellowstone National Park was on fire, and uh, acid rain had happened. That had been an issue in Europe, especially. The Clean Air Act had been passed in the 60s and 70s, and now it was becoming evident that the possibility of us heating the climate through these emissions of greenhouse gases was starting to become realized. And I kind of thought it was an environment story. I kind of came at it in my early days as a journalist as just like a pollution story. We need regulations and a treaty and solve it. And as time went forward, and I began to realize this story had many more dimensions. That it's energy, prosperity on this planet and living a comfortable life and having a job mostly relates to energy access. How you heat your home, cool your home, how you feed yourself. The mobility, fertilizers exist because of fossil fuels at the amounts that we're using them. They used to get fertilizer from guano, from bird.
Hmm.
Wars were fought over guano, over bird crap, when that was the way you fertilized your crops. And then these two chemists, the Haber-Bosch, I think that's the name,
Yep.
the
Mhm.
technique for turning air, nitrogen into fertilizer, revolutionized things. So we need we have needed these fuels, these substances, for fertilizer, for energy. And you put that up against our need to have a livable relationship with the climate system. And the energy part still comes first
Mhm.
for most of us in the world. And I've been in poor communities in the middle of India and in sub-Saharan Africa where there's no energy except the energy of a woman or children going out to get firewood
Hmm.
and then burning the firewood in a home and creating smoky pollution inside the home. That's vastly worse than the pollution you guys suffered with through the Canadian wildfires. And
Mhm.
it's every day.
Hmm.
So as I'm reporting on all this, I'm thinking, oh, this is about that pollution too. It's about energy poverty. It's about um, transitions. How does technology give us a bigger landscape of things to substitute, and who benefits? These are multi-dimensional problems. So that made it really hard to fit it into what we called a news story. Can you imagine me writing an article for the New York Times about what I just described? No, because it's sort of a many-headed monster. I could write, and that's why when I was at the New York Times for a long time, and I'll share a couple slides here. Just I don't want to bog things down, but it's worth seeing a couple things. Where's my? Yeah, here we go. So I didn't grow up wanting to be a journalist either. I had a biology degree as an undergraduate, and but I kind of backed into journalism and began telling the story of science. I came to the New York Times, and which was a great privilege after working in magazines for a long time. And there's this story. My first stories on climate were here, 1985, about chilling the planet through nuclear war, all the smoke. And then, of course, 1988. And just one quick glimpse, the back cover of this magazine selling you concern about global warming was selling you cigarettes.
Yeah,
So
really,
things again are complicated.
yes.
Um, so I was at the New York Times for a total of about 21 years in different capacities. 14 as a reporter, and then I wrote my column, my daughter's column. And the stories that got attention on the front page were mostly about the politics of global warming. They weren't really about the science of it. And I learned about all these impediments to how the news filter presents the world. I'm not going to go through them right now because maybe if people can watch this after the fact and scroll through, they'll see some of the realities of the newsroom that make it hard to convey things that have multiple dimensions. So that was a frustration for me. And now, I think we're in an environment now where the news we see is still vital. What my friends who are newspaper journalists and at CNN and especially at local papers and local news media, they still do a vital job. Their job is being um, greatly constrained by financial problems of this business. It's going away, the news business, as we knew it. And there, so you can't rely on that process necessarily to give you what you need to know to thrive as a community or as a family going forward or as an individual. You have to find your own way forward, especially on problems like climate change. And usually it comes to me with taking apart big problems like when we think of the climate crisis, it feels overwhelming. I use this slide when I talk sometimes. It's a complexity monster. There are complexity monsters in many arenas, whether it's Ukraine or the Middle East. Boy, talk about a complexity monster. How do you untangle? And it usually starts with asking questions. And when you do that, you find, just as you heard from Shamira, there's plenty to do, especially at the local level, that can get around the typical kind of partisan fights. Um, I talk about and that sometimes means taking that climate problem that might be the thing that you worry about the most, climate change, and putting it back in the back of the conversation. And just starting with, what do people need? What does a community need? A community needs to be safe. A community needs to be breathing clean air, whether they're Republican or Democrat. You know, you all experience the commonality of that Canadian wildfire smoke. And in Louisiana, groups that are marginalized get hit so hard, and they can be invisible unless there are people like Rise St. James to make that case on the bigger landscape, to catch the microphone. And you know, the mainstream media have done plenty of stories on Cancer Alley, but that doesn't really necessarily do the job enough. Getting creative with your communication, with companies, making that accountability case. You know, what is this chemical? Why are you using it? Why is it escaping into the air? We're paying the cost for that, literally, through our health. How can we work with you or against you to make things better? So that comes down to clean air is a fundamental, you know, and living resiliently is fundamental. The houses I show here are in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I wrote about a terrible storm there, 40 inches of rain in like 2 days. And this is 8 years ago, maybe. And there's a home there that got flooded. It was probably built in the 1980s. And that home at the bottom, the pictures are by Charles Coulter, who's a historian, geographer. That was a home that was built in the 1800s and not far away. So also in Louisiana. And look at the difference. The one built recently was built in a floodplain, obviously, and it got flooded out and wrecked. And they obviously were wealthy enough to have insurance. The one below was built off the ground. How smart. So what did we forget? Why aren't standards in Louisiana such that that's the way you build houses if you build in a floodplain? And those are conversations communities can have that don't really get stuck in this sort of us and them fights. I want to show this little clip. I'll probably pause here because, you know, the whole climate issue was so focused on Washington and on getting a big bill passed, and for years and years and years. And then lo and behold, under Biden, this past 2-3 years, we've had the infrastructure law, which is close to $1 trillion. A big chunk of that is about energy infrastructure. And we have the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, got passed. So now at the federal level, there's all these resources, right? And I could write 1,000 stories about that, but that's not going to help a community in your part of the Midwest or in Louisiana or in Hawaii harness that money. And I had a conversation on my webcast a couple of years ago after the first bill, the Inflation Reduction Act was, the infrastructure bill was passed. And Jigar Shah here, he's a private successful solar entrepreneur who for the last 2 years has been running the Biden administration's vast loan program at the Energy Department, basically offering all these resources to towns and cities and villages to do things like electrify their buses or change their streetlights and the like. Just listen, this is like 1 minute, and it's such a magical minute because it shows you how big the flip of the script has been. I'm assuming it'll work. So what?
We have thousands, actually tens of thousands of people who are already active on these issues. When you think about what this takes, we have 19,500 organized cities and towns and communities in this country. That's it, 19,500. 14,500 of them have a population that's less than 5,000, right? And so what this requires is sustained effort at the local level, always, right? When the transit authority makes the decision to replace old diesel buses with something else, they need to choose electric buses. And we have programs to pay for it. But if the transit agency doesn't apply for the program, it doesn't happen. And I can't force them to do it from the federal government. All I can do is say, here are all of the resources. But someone in the local community can force them to make a decision that's in their own best financial interest. The same thing's true with the way in which school buses are done. You know, only 50% of streetlights in this country are LED. We could replace all the rest of the streetlights with LED lights. It's like an 8-month payback, right? The amount of school rooftops that don't have solar on them when it's fully financeable and you save money from day one, right? I mean, what it takes is someone who actually is willing to spend a few extra hours every week to say, you know what, I want to make my community better. And the federal government's passed $1.2 trillion to support that. But we can't force it top down. That's not how our country works, right? It's got to be forced at the local level with resources that we provide to that, change maker and that muckraker.
So, I mean, that says so much to me, right?
Yeah.
We need more Shamiras. And
That's right.
and how does that happen? I think universities like yours play a big role. I was at Columbia for 4 years, and I taught at Pace University before that in the Hudson Valley. And at Pace University, for example, there was an environmental clinic modeled on a law school clinic where students got out into the community and worked on briefs. They developed policy briefs to help communities do things like put solar panels on the train station parking lot. And they also did a policy brief on to build a law for New York State to ban circuses that come in with elephants, which are terribly abused in circuses. And the students did this, and they do it in a really cool way. John Cronin, the teacher who taught that, I co-taught it with him a little bit. He knew that these challenges don't get solved in one semester,
Mm-hmm.
and not even in 1 year. So you need a kind of educational project that can be handed off from one cohort of students to the next. And one thing that environmental policy class used to do was the end of the semester, instead of writing a paper, they wrote a brief for the next semester's students coming in to take up the mantle and push it forward. And I think education, there's schools everywhere, and high schools can do this too. I met a young high school student from the Adirondacks up in upstate New York in the middle of nowhere who he was hired by his town as a high school student to help do their climate plan because he was engaged. He was the guy that Jigger was talking about. He just happened to be a high school student. He was willing to put in a few hours and do that. And none of this is easy. And all of it's, to some extent, and this is one of those terrible words, incremental. But incrementalism can actually matter when you're dealing with an issue like climate change, a complexity monster. There is no quick fix. And the one thing that I do think everyone can work on really actively that can make a difference pretty quickly is to reduce vulnerability. This slide shows you that I think a lot of what we think about when we worry about climate change is more about vulnerability than about climate. It's, if we all lived in glass bubbles and grew our crops, with hydroponics, with rainwater harvests, and we wouldn't really worry about the climate. It could be snowing or raining or doing whatever, right? But we don't live that way. And when you look across the landscape of any community, whether at the global scale or in any town, you know that we're not all equally vulnerable. And this echoes the work there in Rise St. James. Look around your community and ask, when there's a heat wave, who suffers? And it's the elderly couple who are living on a fixed income who can't afford to turn on their air conditioner. It's farm workers who don't, in states where there aren't regulations to limit exposure to heat, which is still a big problem. It's homeless people who are unhoused and who may not have a cooling shelter to go to. And the same thing for cold. It's about extremes, not just about global warming. In fact, University of Michigan, I wrote about this, did a study saying if we had policies that focus on trimming the two, there's certain things we can do in any community that can reduce vulnerability to both heat and cold, like weatherizing houses. If you're living in a low-income housing unit that has no insulation, it's going to be cold in the winter and too hot in the summer. So you can cut both sources of health vulnerability with one step. And that's such an important reality. I'm going to play another little clip. The one thing I love about webcasts, and I'm so great, Desmond, I'm so impressed with what you do here. because if I got the numbers right, you said this is your 6th season.
Yep, this is our 6th season. So we
So
our
you started.
we'll line up with semesters.
So you started before COVID, or not?
We have had a version. It started in my grade 10 class. And so we were doing that during COVID. But after we made it quote unquote global. So when I count the 6th season is when we started going global.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I started my webcast March 12th, 15th of COVID, pandemic year 1, and I've done 500 of them now.
Wow.
And I find that through conversation, it's not the nightly news, it's not radio, it's small, but I've found connections get made and
Oh, yeah.
issues get explored that can really resonate, and so I'm thrilled you're doing this, and I think the more we can pass this kind of model around, better too.
That's right.
Yeah, and I do want to show. I'll show this one more clip from my show that I think makes the point. I was talking with Diana Liverman, who just retired from the University of Arizona. She's a geographer of climate. She's been an author of those big IPCC reports and stuff. She said something that to me is just like what Jigger said. It's like crystal little nugget that can change the way people think. You'll hear her in a second.
When we talk about climate risk, some people still just think, oh, it's the probability of a heat wave. But we need to think about risk not as the probability of the heat wave, but as the probability of harm.
That line, I wish every reporter covering climate change put this like tattoo on their forehead, because it makes the case for what's now called climate justice is really mostly about climate vulnerability or the lack of vulnerability, just as environmental vulnerability, like with Louisiana and the Cancer Alley with other kinds of compounds. So, if there's a big storm, big flood, a big fire, if the first question you ask is who was at risk or who was harmed, or looking ahead, who can be made less vulnerable, then all sorts of opportunities arise. Global warming is not, you could stop global warming literally and still have people exposed and dying in wildfires, smoke, all these things, because the hazards are there in the system. Coastal flooding, rising sea levels is making flooding worse, and heavy, more intense rainfall in some cases making flooding worse. But we have to deal with the fact that vulnerability can be reduced now. So anyone who's just focused on cutting CO2, the main greenhouse gas, is missing really important opportunities at the community level. And finally, when you look at the word communicate, think we all have some expectation that like journalists are going to save the day, or my God, journalists are failing. Journalists fail all the time. We failed on the Iraq War. We failed on the New York Times failed horribly on Nazism, on communism with Stalin. You can't always rely on journalism to be the factor that makes a difference. But communication, if you start thinking about communication in different ways, it's a sharing of knowledge, sharing of information and ideas. That's like the dictionary definition. It's not me telling you something. It's us sharing, building a relationship. And that then gets you started in important ways. And I could show more stuff, but I just want to let that sit and with people, and we can talk about some of this. And I can go on with a couple more examples. And by the way, I do think social media, for all of its problems, is a key opportunity.
Yes.
Going forward too. So that's what I'll say for the moment.
All right. Anybody has questions, comments? This is your time. So I want to thank you, first of all, for what you just gave us. One of the things I want to re-emphasize is that equation, okay? Risk is equal to hazard times exposure times vulnerability. let's focus in on that for a bit, because what you're saying, and I want to emphasize, is that we have control over exposure and vulnerability 90 something percent of the time.
Right.
Because and what this also I think underlines is that hazards are all around us. In the most ideal situation in the universe that we currently live, hazards are all around us. We cannot avoid hazards, but we can avoid exposure, lower the exposure, and lower the vulnerability. Those are the two things that we have a control over. Hazards are like cosmic rays coming from, outer, we can't control that.
Yeah.
We can control earthquakes. And, so that's a very important point, is that we need to focus really on, not to say that there are some hazards, man-made hazards that we have control over, but we need to really focus a lot on lowering exposure and making sure that the vulnerability is also minimized.
I couldn't agree more. And by the way, that's mostly local.
Right.
So that's something anyone, there are these two geographers, one at Villanova University and the other at Northern Illinois University, who've done this, they do this mapping work. They call it expanding bullseye. And this is the exposure part. They map for this, they've done this for, I can show their website. Yeah, here we go. They've done this for all kinds of hazards. This is their website. It's I could put it in the chat too. But they, like right there at the top, what you're seeing is the scar from a tornado that happened. And they're showing you that if that same tornado happened in different years, you'd see the exposure to that tornado has greatly increased, even though their tornado is the same intensity.
Right.
The hazard there, and this is 1950, 1980, 2010, 2040. This is a putative hypothetical community, but they've done this for all kinds of communities, not just hypothetical ones. And it shows you very clearly that we're building risk when we grow in zones where a hazard is implicit. And if those new homes are mobile homes, which tend to be flimsy and can fall apart in a tornado, then we're in big trouble. And that's true in the Southeast. So we can identify these problems. You can go to your community meeting and say, well, what are we doing with tornado shelters? What are we doing with our building codes? In America, there are some building codes that are national, but it's mostly not. So that gives you all these action points. And then from there, you can build toward the bigger things. And by the way, tornadoes are still what tornadoes do in a warming climate is still kind of fuzzy. They're not becoming worse. Some of the worst categories actually seem to be happening less. So you can't always point to extreme weather and say, oh, that's global warming either. And that means you want to reduce risk, focus on exposure and vulnerability, even while you work on changing emissions, cutting emissions of greenhouse gases.
Exactly.
So you made a great point there.
Any comments, questions? Ariel, do you have any?
No questions from me, but great presentation. Thank you so much for the information.
Okay.
And with this show too, I'd love to see what we can do together to see if I can help you expand your audience. We can talk. I don't know where it's so it streams live through Zoom and then you post it later, or
right, that's how we do it now. But yeah, we could talk about it over the summer break here, how we could improve audience reach and those sort of things. Definitely.
Yeah. I'm happy to, and I'm still learning too.
We all are. We all
I find it hard to figure out the best way to engage with audiences that matter. I use StreamYard, which is, there's a free version. I use a version that's like just $30 a month or something. And this is the playlist on YouTube. So it goes to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter all at the same time.
Mhm.
And that I like that. And then when it's done, it's archived and you can still do other stuff with it.
Right, right. Yeah, we need
So
to
there might be some possibilities in
That's
switching
right.
platforms.
So we have a few people from Trinidad here. Anybody, Pat, you have any questions or things to say? Lisa, you could unmute and ask a question.
Who's from Trinidad?
Pat McGroy is from Trinidad, Len Archer, Trinidad. Yeah,
Huh.
but it looks like we have a question. Lisa?
Hi there.
Hi.
Great to be here. Great presentation, Andrew. Thank you so much. So I work with a nonprofit organization called Birds Caribbean, and we're dedicated to the conservation of birds and nature in all the islands of the Caribbean. We work with a lot of local partners, building capacity for conservation work. And we have to deal with the impacts from climate change. So of course, sea level rise and then increased frequency and severity of hurricanes. More than 17 countries were devastated by hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. Then we had Dorian in 2019, and of course, a long history of hurricanes. But anyway, I just have a question for Andrew. What do you suggest for these Caribbean islands where, we're facing these impacts? The climate change impacts were not created by the people in the islands. And the resources are really, really poor for doing the kinds of things that you're talking about, as far as, developing the infrastructure that's going to save the houses next time around. And then also the trend towards like building seawalls, to ward off sea level rise and so forth, which isn't good for the environment because that removes the mangroves and the coastal protection that they provide. So do you have any thoughts or comments or advice on how we can approach that?
Well, yeah, those are great questions. The one with seawalls that's everywhere. It's an issue with how adaptation tends to be pursued. Most of the money, most of the plans focus on infrastructural projects that can have adverse effects. Along the Mississippi, this is a long history. You build a levee and you're not stopping flooding, you're just moving it to the next town. And seawalls, this is happening even in the debate over New York City Harbor, where, if you put a seawall in one area, you're actually, again, not, you might be protecting a rich area like Wall Street, but the water has to go somewhere. So that issue is really important. And I think the pressure there can only come through empowering communities, or in this case, ecosystems that might be imperiled by these kinds of mega projects. And if more money were spent on, whether it's mangrove restoration or mangrove, growth and the like, depending on where you are, then you can have multiple benefits and not have those kind of mega projects. On the issue of hurricane vulnerability, the problem for the Caribbean, and I've written about this, is that there are eras in the Caribbean, even in cooler climates, when you've had really bad hurricane patterns. So hurricanes and climate change are still complicated. It does seem that warmer waters are making storms quicker to intensify, which means warnings are shorter. But thinking that if you slow global warming, you're taking away the hazard of hurricanes is fantasy thinking. Al Gore's movie, I think, made a mistake in, making Katrina the emblem of global warming, because the implication was if we reduce greenhouse gases, then we don't have to worry about hurricanes anymore. And this gets to what Desmond was saying a few minutes ago. We live in a hazardous landscape and seascape. And the Caribbean is hazardous. I've written about tsunami risk, what happened in Haiti twice so far is not even the worst case for Haiti for earthquake. So one argument is basically economic development makes you better if countries become more dynamic and more educated and more prosperous, then they can get more focused on environmental conservation. They can be more resilient and plan more resiliently. It's hard to plan when you're poor because you're just scrambling through the day. You're not thinking about the future.
Yeah, survival.
So those are a few thoughts about the Caribbean.
Great, thank you.
And Andrew, I saw you put something in the chat about paraquat. You want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I got out of journalism school in 1982 and I had a background in science, so I wanted to write about science. And while I was an assistant copy editor at Science Digest magazine, I can't remember how I first heard about it. Oh no, the editor, right. An editor told me, he said, why don't you do a story on organ transplantation, which has nothing to do with Trinidad. But what I did, the first lung transplants were taking place. This was an early, lung transplants are really hard. And two guys in America, one in Canada, one in the States, were having lung transplants. And I looked, and both of them were having their lungs replaced because they had been poisoned by paraquat, which is a weed killer. It's a very effective weed killer. It's actually helps you do what's called no-till agriculture, where you spray the field, you kill the weeds, and you can plant right into, you don't have to plow. So it's amazingly neat, but it's devastatingly toxic if you accidentally drink it or get exposed to a large amount. And so I said to the other, I think paraquat's the story, not lung transplants. And I started making phone calls. This is way before the internet.
Oh, wow.
And going to the library, and I called people in Trinidad, the health department in Thailand, and Trinidad had a very high rate of people dying from accidental ingestion of paraquat. So I went down there, and that became the focus of that story. And now paraquat's back in the news because of Parkinson's. Apparently, there's some potential relationship between paraquat and Parkinson's. But that was my first environmental story, and it was about the same thing I've been writing about ever since. This tension between things that are useful technologically or, for industry or agriculture, but that have adverse effects, and how do you balance the benefits and risks? And so that's that story.
When was that story done? That was in the 80s, you said?
1983.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Len, you want to follow up? This is news to me. I never knew about this in terms of its impact in Trinidad.
I was at Andrews in 1983.
I know, right?
No, actually, I have just left Andrews to go to Indiana.
Okay.
But I wanted to make a comment on the issues regarding not just Trinidad, but the developing world and the Caribbean. But we are at the mercy of the developed countries in many ways. But I see a need for education in the Caribbean and some of these other regions do more in terms of environmental protection, not the big story of the hurricanes and so on, but the smaller things like the recycling, the non-use of plastic products. That's one of my business here. We just see millions and millions of plastic bottles lying all around and end up in the sea and the beaches. So I do think we have to do our part in re-education and sensitizing our governments to the need of these basic things that contribute significantly to the effects of not just climate change, global warming, but the environmental issues in general. I think of just recently, everyone here may have heard about the spill that occurred just off Tobago.
Yes,
What, 2 months ago?
Yes.
And what is fascinating that is that we have no one who seems to claim responsibility or knows exactly who the investors belong to
Wow.
or who is responsible for that. But it has resulted in a massive cleanup campaign that's cost the local government millions of dollars. And you think of a small island, actually, 116 square miles with about 50,000 people maximum, along with the help of the central government, clean up the mangrove swamp, the very sensitive areas, over a significant portion of the island because it's small, an island that relies on tourism and fishing and so on. Uh, so yeah, those things are the bigger stories that the developed countries really need to take more responsibility for. But I do sense that we need much more education in our population to understand what the importance of the local environmental issues are and what it actually leads to.
Yeah, boy, oh boy, that's so. You're making me think of several things. Plastics are such an issue right now. And I did a webcast recently. I put it in the chat with a guy who runs a tiny company in Indonesia on the cleanup part.
Hmm.
They're, what do you do with the plastic that's already out there in the ocean and on coasts, in rivers? But the real problem, of course, is the source. And which makes me think about another conversation I just had with a woman with a reporter and with a woman from Maine, actually, who spearheaded a law that looks like it's going to spread across the United States. It's essentially similar to the very old idea of the polluter pays, where companies who manufacture and distribute products they are responsible for the cost of dealing with the waste that emerges from those products. The cardboard, the glass, the plastic. Historically in the United States, depending on what state you were in, you try to recycle. Recycling has been problematic, but this could give the money to communities to help that process happen. But the money now comes from the companies that produce this stuff. And I think the plastic treaty that's being negotiated could eventually provide a revenue source to developing countries to sort of work. You have to work at both ends of the pipeline. You have to work at the reducing the flow, of course, and then cleaning up the stuff. It's a very hard problem. Like again, in Asia is even worse right now, I think, than the Caribbean. It's kind of how do you deal with the problem that exists now, and then how do you turn off the faucet? While still, plastics can't go away. They're very important for many things, but disposable plastic can go away. And some of that's education too, as Len was saying. There are different ways to go to the market. There's different products to purchase that don't necessarily come in a container that you can get the same utility out of. And I don't think I've posted. I did the webcast, but I haven't written it up on my thing yet. But there's lots to do there, and a lot of that work is local too. Especially in small island states, it's local and national.
Right.
Because local is national, which makes it
an
interesting problem.
Immediate, yep. So Len, what are your thoughts on, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but that's okay. What are your thoughts on the role that Caribbean universities could play in environmental education, the awareness that you were talking about as part of it? It's not the whole thing, but what do you think? What are your thoughts? You unmute.
Yeah, I think our educational institutions can take the lead on some of that. I'm not aware of, I know we don't have, by the way, for the people in the chat, we just returned recently here to Trinidad, doing in the administration of the provost here. I know in our institution, we don't have an environmental degree program, for example. which tends to sort of lead on some of those things. What we're doing is really, along with the is designed to for to participate in more recycling and collecting of recyclable products,
Mhm.
having bins and places around to deposit some of the material. I'm not sure about the University of the West Indies, but I think they have an environmental degree program there. I'm not
Yeah, I think
sure.
they do. Mhm.
Yeah. So, um, but it just seems to me that much of this is more academic and is not really reaching the people, so to speak.
Mhm.
But I think we can play a major role. I mean, the institutions, we should be at the forefront, voicing some of this, sensitizing our government to get involved in a more active way. And I don't think our governments are really actively involved in that. We don't look at it that way. At least in Trinidad, I sense Barbados is probably a little better. But in Trinidad, we have long had the history of the blessing of an oil industry. So people tend to see that as the more important thing. They don't see the savings, both from a health point of view and financially, that we can benefit from looking at environmental issues much more carefully and much more closely. Yeah, so I think we are really, we really don't do enough there. We still see ourselves as this little industrial country, which is kind of richer and better off than the others. We don't need to focus on the environment as much as some of the other smaller islands, which may have to attract tourists much more. I think Jamaica is kind of shifting towards that more now, the environment and tourism, and focus on what they can do to attract the third world, I mean the developing world. But we're still way, way, way behind.
Yeah. So, Pat, are you on? You have any thoughts on this? Maybe she's okay. And so, any other questions or comments that anyone has?
Well, just for me, that I'd be happy to be involved and do a webcast, for example, on Caribbean.
Okay.
The role of universities and Caribbean
Yeah.
cleanups. I could do a webcast on that with people from a couple different islands. Same thing with Lisa's work with biodiversity there.
Yeah.
What I try to do with my webcast is to amplify other efforts and then to cross fertilize. Those are the two things I like to do. Cross fertilizing and amplifying.
And amplifying. Yep, that's right. So we can make that happen. I know both Lisa and Len, and we could draw in some others. The University of Guyana, with Guyana now, going more towards oil and gas, and hopefully they're in a position to think about it ahead of time before, the negative impacts of the oil and gas industry really start to take a hold. So yeah, we could work on that with you.
Yeah.
All right.
I could do it.
Yes. So if there are no more questions or comments, we want to go ahead and thank our speaker here, Andrew Revkin, and he's shared with us a number of links so you guys could follow up with him and on these different topics. We also thank Shamira. She also has some links in the chat, and I could share, more information about Rice and James with all of you. So we want to thank both of you. We also thank my co-host, Ariel. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And again, our regular audience members for participating and making these sessions informative, inspiring, and useful to a wide group of people. So with that, we want to sign off and hopefully come back. All of you will come back next week when we will essentially be kicking off the National Allergy and Asthma Month. So you'll be hearing from an EPA personnel on that. Thank you so much. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks
Thank you.
again.
You too. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you very much. Good presentation.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I should say good presentations.
Yes, for sure.